The morning Amelia Bishop watched her father's wagon disappear over the ridge outside Concordia, Montana territory. She counted exactly 3 possessions to her name: a patched wool dress, a pair of worn boots, and the wooden hairpin holding back her dark hair. Nothing pretty had ever belonged to her in all her 21 years, and standing in the dusty street with the September wind cutting through her thin shawl, she wondered if anything ever would. Her father had lost everything in a poker game 2 towns back, including the small homestead they had barely managed to keep after her mother died 5 years earlier. Rather than face his debts, he had packed what remained in the night and left Amelia behind with distant cousins who made their displeasure at her arrival abundantly clear. The Harpers ran a boarding house at the edge of town, and they needed help more than they wanted another mouth to feed. Amelia understood her place quickly enough. "You will earn your keep," Cousin Margaret had said that first morning, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "There is work aplenty, and I expect you to do it without complaint." Amelia had nodded, swallowing the hurt and anger that threatened to surface. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, hauled water from the well until her shoulders burned, and washed linens in the cold creek until her hands cracked and bled. The September days grew shorter, and the Montana nights brought frost that crept through the thin blankets in her attic room. She owned nothing of beauty, nothing of comfort, and the realization settled into her bones like the cold itself. 3 weeks after her arrival, Amelia carried a basket of mending down to the general store to exchange for thread. The proprietor, Mr. Hutchins, was a kind man with spectacles that slid down his nose when he worked his ledgers. He greeted her warmly, a stark contrast to the cool reception she received most places in town. "Miss Bishop," he said, looking up from his counter, "what brings you in today?" "Cousin Margaret needs thread for mending," Amelia replied, setting the basket down carefully. She said to trade the work for supplies. Mr. Hutchins examined the neat stitches in the shirts and trousers, nodding his approval. "Fine work, very fine. Your cousin is fortunate to have such skilled hands in her household." Amelia did not mention that Margaret had never once praised her work or offered a kind word. She simply waited while Mr. Hutchins gathered the thread, along with a few needles and a small packet of pins. "There is a man who comes down from the mountains," Mr. Hutchins said conversationally as he wrapped the supplies. "Brings pelts and meat to trade. He was asking about someone who could mend his winter gear, and I thought perhaps your cousin might be interested in the work." "I am sure she would be," Amelia said, though her heart sank at the thought of more work to fill her already endless days. "He will be back tomorrow," Mr. Hutchins continued. "Name is Austin Norwood, keeps to himself mostly, but he is honest and pays fair. Not like some of the trappers who come through." Amelia thanked him and gathered the supplies, heading back out into the afternoon sun. The main street of Concordia was busy with the usual traffic of wagons and horses, miners heading to the claims in the surrounding hills, and women shopping for their households. She kept her head down, aware of the whispers that sometimes followed her. The abandoned daughter, the charity case, the girl with nothing. The next morning, Cousin Margaret sent her to the general store with a list of items needed for the boarding house. Amelia arrived just as a massive figure was unloading pelts from a pack horse tied outside. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt and arms thick with muscle. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a beard covered the lower half of his tanned face. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who spent his life in the wilderness, and Amelia found herself staring before she caught herself and looked away. "That is everything, Mr. Hutchins," the man said, his voice a deep rumble that carried through the open door. "I will need coffee, flour, salt, and ammunition if you have it." "Of course, Mr. Norwood," the proprietor replied. "And I mentioned to Miss Bishop here that you were looking for someone to mend your winter gear." Amelia froze as both men turned to look at her. Austin Norwood's eyes were a startling shade of blue against his weathered skin, and they studied her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You do mending work?" he asked directly. "Yes, sir," Amelia managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I can repair most anything." He nodded slowly. "I have gear that needs fixing before the heavy snows come. Tears in my coat, some leather work on my boots and gloves. Can you handle leather?" "I can, sir." "What do you charge?" Amelia hesitated, glancing at Mr. Hutchins, who gave her an encouraging nod. She had no idea what to charge, as Margaret kept whatever payment came from her work. "Whatever you think is fair, sir." Austin Norwood's eyes narrowed slightly, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her threadbare dress to the desperation underneath. "I will pay $2 for the work, and I will bring you fresh meat as well. Does that seem fair to you?" $2 was more money than Amelia had seen in months. She nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, very fair." "I will bring the gear by the boarding house tomorrow morning," he said. "The Harper place at the edge of town, correct?" "Yes, sir." He tipped his head to her, gathered his supplies, and left with the same quiet efficiency he had shown unloading his pelts. Amelia watched him go, her mind racing with questions about the mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness and came to town only to trade. That evening, Cousin Margaret was less than pleased about the arrangement. "You should have consulted me first," she said sharply. "I run this household and I decide what work we take on." "I am sorry, Cousin Margaret," Amelia said, keeping her eyes downcast. "Mr. Hutchins suggested it, and I thought you would want the income." "The income, yes, but not the trouble of having mountain men coming around. They are rough people, Amelia, and I will not have them bringing their wilderness ways to my respectable establishment." Amelia bit back the response that rose to her lips. The boarding house was far from respectable, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, but she knew better than to argue. "I will make sure to take the work outside, Cousin Margaret. He will not disturb your boarders." Margaret sniffed but said nothing more, and Amelia took that as acceptance. She lay awake that night in her cold attic room, thinking about Austin Norwood and wondering what kind of man chose to live alone in the mountains, away from the company of others. She imagined it must be a hard life, full of dangers and privations, but there had been something in his eyes that spoke of contentment rather than hardship. It puzzled her, this man who seemed so at ease with his solitude, while she felt the weight of her loneliness like a physical ache. True to his word, Austin Norwood appeared at the boarding house the next morning just after dawn. Amelia met him on the porch, not wanting to risk Margaret's displeasure by inviting him inside. He carried a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas, which he set down carefully on the railing. "Everything that needs mending is in there," he said. "The coat has tears along the seams and one on the sleeve. The gloves have worn through at the fingers, and the boots need new stitching along the soles." Amelia unwrapped the bundle and examined each item carefully. The coat was made of thick wool lined with fur, warm and well made despite its damage. The leather gloves and boots showed the wear of constant use but were good quality. "I can have this done in 3 days," she said. "Will that suit you?" "That will be fine," he said. "I will be in town until the end of the week, staying at the Lucky Dollar if you need to reach me before then." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her. "You do good work, Miss Bishop. Mr. Hutchins showed me the mending you had done for trade. Your stitches are small and even better than most I have seen." The compliment caught Amelia off guard, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, sir. Name is Austin," he said. "No need for all the formal talk." "Thank you, Austin," she managed, and he nodded before walking away with that same easy stride. Amelia brought the bundle inside and set to work immediately, knowing that the sooner she finished, the sooner she could prove herself capable. The tiers in the coat required careful attention, as she had to match the existing seams and reinforce them against future wear. She worked by the window in the kitchen, where the light was best, her needle moving in and out with practiced precision. "What are you working on?" asked a voice, and Amelia looked up to find one of the boarders, an elderly prospector named Mr. Davies, peering at the coat with interest. "Mending work for a trapper," she replied. "That is Austin Norwood's coat," Mr. Davies said with certainty. "I have seen him wear it coming down from the high country. He is a good man that helped pull me out of a collapsed mine shaft 2 winters back, risked his own neck to do it. He does not talk much, but he has a good heart." Amelia filed this information away, adding it to the small collection of facts she had gathered about the mountain man. Good heart. Honest. Kept to himself. She wondered what had driven him to the solitary life, but she knew it was not her place to ask. She worked late into the night, her fingers cramping from the constant motion of the needle, but she pushed through until the coat was finished. The next day she tackled the gloves and boots, replacing worn leather patches and reinforcing the stitching with wax thread that would hold up against moisture and cold. By the third morning, everything was complete, and she wrapped the bundle carefully, taking pride in the quality of her work. Austin returned that afternoon, and his face showed genuine surprise when he examined the repaired items. "This is excellent work," he said, running his thumb over the neat stitches. "Better than I expected." "I am glad you are pleased," Amelia said, feeling a warm glow at his approval. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $2 silver, pressing them into her hand. His fingers were rough and calloused, but his touch was gentle. "You earned this, Miss Bishop." "Amelia," she found herself saying. "You can call me Amelia." His blue eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a connection she did not fully understand but felt deep in her chest. "Amelia," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, almost musical. "I brought the meat I promised," he continued, gesturing to a canvas sack he had set by the porch steps. "Fresh venison should last your household a week or more." "That is very generous," Amelia said, though she knew Margaret would take credit for the meat and likely give Amelia the smallest portions. Austin seemed to sense her thoughts because his expression grew serious. "Make sure you get your share," he said firmly. "You earned it with your work." Before she could respond, he was walking away, leaving her standing on the porch with the silver dollars clutched in her hand, and the warmth of his concern settling around her like a blanket. That night, Margaret did indeed take the venison and immediately began planning meals for the boarders, but to Amelia's surprise, Mr. Davies spoke up at dinner. "Miss Bishop did that mending work for the meat," he said loudly. "Seems only fair she should get a decent portion." Margaret's lips thinned, but she could not argue in front of the other boarders without seeming uncharitable. Amelia received a proper serving of the tender venison, and for the first time in weeks, she went to bed with a full stomach and $2 silver hidden in her pillowcase. Austin Norwood left Concordia the next day, heading back into the mountains before the first snow. Amelia watched for him from the boarding house windows, catching a glimpse of his tall figure and the pack horse loaded with supplies as they disappeared up the trail toward the high country. She felt an unexpected pang of loss which puzzled her. She barely knew the man, had spoken to him only a handful of times, yet his absence left a hollow feeling in her chest. The weeks passed, and autumn gave way to winter with a vengeance. Snow fell in heavy blankets across Concordia, turning the streets into muddy rivers during the day and sheets of ice at night. The boarding house was drafty and cold, and Amelia spent her days hauling wood for the stove, melting snow for water when the well froze, and trying to keep warm in her thin dress and worn shawl. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. Margaret grudgingly gave Amelia a day of rest, but there were no gifts or special meals. Amelia spent the day in her attic room, listening to the sounds of celebration from the houses in town and feeling the familiar weight of loneliness settle over her. She thought about her mother, who had always made Christmas special despite their poverty, hanging pine boughs and singing carols in her sweet voice. She thought about her father, wherever he was now, and wondered if he ever regretted abandoning her. And she thought about Austin Norwood, alone in his mountain cabin, and wondered if he felt lonely too, or if his solitude was truly the peace it seemed to be. January brought temperatures so cold that water froze in the pitcher by her bed, and Amelia woke each morning to frost coating the inside of the attic window. She wrapped herself in every piece of fabric she owned and still shivered through the nights. Her hands were raw and bleeding from the constant work in the cold water, and her cough grew worse despite her efforts to hide it from Margaret. It was on a particularly bitter morning in late January that Austin Norwood returned to Concordia. Amelia was drawing water from the well when she heard the familiar sound of his pack horses, hooves crunching through the snow. She looked up to see him riding toward the boarding house, and her heart gave an unexpected leap. He looked bigger somehow in his heavy winter coat, his beard longer and his face ruddy from the cold. He dismounted smoothly despite the icy ground and tied his horse to the porch rail before approaching her. "Amelia," he said, and again her name in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "I have more work if you are willing." "Of course," she said quickly, setting down the heavy bucket. "What do you need?" "I tore my spare coat on a tree branch," he said, "and I need a new pair of gloves. I have the leather if you can make them." "I can," she assured him. "How long will you be in town?" "A few days," he replied. "I brought pelts to trade and need to stock up on supplies before heading back." He paused, his blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You look cold," he said bluntly. "Where is your proper coat?" "I do not have one," Amelia admitted, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. "This suffices." His expression darkened. "That is no kind of protection against this weather. You will freeze." "I manage well enough," she said, though even as she spoke, a violent shiver ran through her body, betraying her words. Austin was quiet for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "I will bring the work by tomorrow," he said, "and I will bring you something else too." Before she could ask what he meant, he was mounting his horse and riding toward the main street. Amelia watched him go, confused by his words and the concern she had seen in his eyes. The next morning, Austin appeared with not only the torn coat and leather for gloves, but also a thick wool blanket dyed a deep blue. "This is for you," he said, pressing it into her arms, "to help with the cold." Amelia stared at the blanket, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. It was beautiful, the wool soft and tightly woven, the color rich and vibrant. She had never owned anything so fine. "I cannot accept this," she whispered. "It is too much." "You can and you will," Austin said firmly. "Consider it payment in advance for the gloves." "I need them done well, and I need you healthy enough to do the work." It was not true, and they both knew it, but Amelia clutched the blanket to her chest, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much." His expression softened. "You are welcome, Amelia." Now get yourself warm, and I will check back in 2 days for the work." That night, wrapped in the warm blue blanket, Amelia slept more soundly than she had in months. The wool held her body heat, cocooning her against the frigid air, and for the first time since arriving in Concordia, she did not wake shivering and miserable. She pressed her face into the soft fabric and let herself cry, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of a gift freely given. She worked on Austin's coat and gloves with even more care than before, determined to show her gratitude through the quality of her work. The gloves in particular required intricate cutting and stitching, but she poured all her skill into them, making sure each seam was perfect and each stitch secure. When Austin returned 2 days later, his face showed the same quiet approval as before. "Fine work," he said, examining the gloves carefully. "These will serve me well." He paid her $3 this time, along with more venison and a sack of potatoes. "Winter is hard up in the mountains," he said, "but it seems it is hard down here too." Amelia wanted to tell him everything. About her father leaving, about Margaret's coldness, about the endless work and the loneliness that seemed to seep into her very bones. But she held her tongue, not wanting to burden him with her troubles. "I am grateful for the work," she said instead, "and for the blanket. It has made all the difference." "Good," he said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "I will be back in town in a few weeks. Perhaps I will have more work for you then." "I would be happy to help," Amelia said, and she meant it more than he could know. After he left, Amelia realized that she was counting the days until his return, marking them in her mind like precious stones in a collection. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness, this desire to see someone's face and hear their voice. She tried to tell herself it was simply gratitude for his kindness, but deep down she knew it was something more. February came with even colder temperatures and brutal winds that howled through the streets of Concordia like living things. Amelia's cough grew worse, and one morning she woke with a fever that made her head swim and her body ache. She forced herself up anyway, knowing that Margaret would show no sympathy for illness, and stumbled downstairs to begin her morning chores. "You look terrible," Margaret said sharply. "Do not breathe on the boarders. We cannot afford to have them fall sick and leave." Amelia nodded mutely and went about her work, but by midday she was so dizzy she could barely stand. Mr. Davies found her collapsed by the woodpile, her lips blue with cold and her skin burning with fever. "Margaret Harper, you should be ashamed," he roared, carrying Amelia inside despite his own advanced years. "This girl is sick as a dog, and you have her working outside in this cold." Margaret sputtered protests, but Mr. Davies ignored her, settling Amelia in a chair by the kitchen stove and wrapping her in the blue blanket. "Someone needs to fetch the doctor," he said. "And do not tell me you cannot afford it. This girl has worked herself near to death for you. The least you can do is see she gets proper care." The doctor came that evening, examined Amelia, and pronounced her on the verge of pneumonia. He left medicine and strict instructions for rest and warmth, along with a look at Margaret that made clear his disapproval of the situation. Margaret had no choice but to comply, at least for a few days, though she made her resentment clear in every interaction. Amelia spent 4 days in bed, drifting in and out of feverish sleep. She dreamed of her mother singing, of her father's wagon disappearing over the ridge, and of Austin Norwood standing in the snow with his blue eyes watching her with an expression she could not read. When she finally woke with her fever broken, weak but clear-headed, her first thought was to wonder if Austin had come to town while she was sick. Mr. Davies, who had taken it upon himself to check on her regularly, answered that question the next day. "That mountain man was here 3 days ago," he said, "looking for you. Margaret told him you were sick, and I have never seen a man's face go so dark so fast. He wanted to see you, but the doctor would not allow visitors. He left this for you." He handed Amelia a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. With trembling fingers, she opened it to find a pair of rabbit fur mittens, beautifully crafted and lined with soft wool. There was no note, but none was needed. The mittens spoke of warmth and care, of someone thinking about her comfort in the frozen depths of winter. Amelia held them to her chest and cried, overwhelmed by the realization that someone cared whether she lived or died, whether she was warm or cold. Austin Norwood barely knew her, yet he had shown her more kindness in a few months than her own family had in years. "He is a good man," Mr. Davies said gently, "and I think he has taken a particular interest in your welfare." "Why would he?" Amelia whispered. "I am nobody, I have nothing." "That is where you are wrong, my dear," Mr. Davies said. "You have yourself, and that is something. You are kind and hard-working and skilled with your hands. Any man with sense would see your worth." Amelia wanted to believe him, but a lifetime of feeling worthless was hard to overcome. Still, she put on the mittens and felt their warmth surround her hands, and she let herself hope, just a little, when she was strong enough to work again. Margaret immediately loaded her with tasks as if to make up for the days of lost labor. Amelia did not complain, but Mr. Davies and some of the other boarders began to push back against Margaret's treatment, insisting that Amelia receive proper meals and adequate rest. It was not much, but it was something, and Amelia felt a small measure of protection in their advocacy. March arrived with the promise of spring still weeks away. The snow continued to fall, and the mountain passes remained impassable. Amelia wondered if Austin was all right in his cabin, if he had enough supplies to last until the thaw, if he thought about her the way she thought about him during the long, cold nights. She got her answer in mid-March when Austin rode into Concordia on a day when the sun finally broke through the clouds and turned the snow to glittering diamonds. He came directly to the boarding house, and the look on his face when Amelia answered the door made her heart skip. "You are better," he said, and there was such relief in his voice that it took her breath away. "I am," she confirmed. "Thank you for the mittens. They are beautiful and so warm." "I should have brought them sooner," he said gruffly, "before you got sick." "You could not have known," Amelia said. "And you have already been far kinder to me than you had any obligation to be." Austin looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I am not being kind out of obligation, Amelia. I am being kind because I want to be." The words hung in the air between them, full of unspoken meaning. Amelia felt her cheeks flush and her heart race, but before she could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Norwood," she said with false sweetness, "what can we do for you today?" "I have work for Amelia," he said, his tone cooling considerably in Margaret's presence. "If she is well enough to take it on." "She is quite recovered," Margaret said. "What sort of work?" Austin pulled a bundle from his saddle bag. "I need a new shirt made and some repairs to my saddle bags. I have the fabric and materials." "Amelia can certainly handle that," Margaret said, reaching for the bundle, but Austin held it back. "I will give it directly to Amelia," he said firmly, "and I will pay her directly as well." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she could not protest without seeming grasping. She stepped aside and allowed Austin to hand the bundle to Amelia. "I will need about a week for this," Amelia said, examining the fabric, a sturdy cotton in a dark green. "Will you be in town that long?" "I will make sure to be," Austin said, and the promise in his words made Amelia's heart flutter. Over the next week, Amelia worked on Austin's shirt with special care. She measured based on the torn coat she had mended, adjusting for the fit of a shirt instead. and she added small details like reinforced seams at the shoulders and cuffs that would hold up against hard use. She embroidered his initials inside the collar, small and neat, a mark that this garment was made specifically for him. Austin came by every day, ostensibly to check on the progress of his work, but Amelia suspected he had other reasons. They talked while she sewed, and she learned about his life in the mountains. He had come to Montana Territory 5 years earlier, leaving behind a family farm in Missouri after his parents died and his brothers divided the land. He had always preferred the solitude of the wilderness, and he had built himself a cabin high in the mountains where he trapped and hunted and lived by the rhythm of the seasons. "Is it not lonely?" Amelia asked, her needle pausing in its work. Austin considered the question. "It was not," he said slowly. "But lately, I find myself thinking about what it would be like to have someone to share it with." His blue eyes met hers, and Amelia felt the weight of his meaning. She looked down at her work, her heart pounding. "I think," she said carefully, "that the right person would find it beautiful up there, away from the noise and judgment of town." "You think so?" Austin asked, and there was hope in his voice. "I do," Amelia said softly. When the shirt was finished, along with the repairs to the saddle bags, Austin examined them with obvious pleasure. "This shirt is the finest I have ever owned," he said. "You have a real gift, Amelia." "I am glad you like it," she said, ducking her head to hide her blush. Austin paid her $5, an enormous sum, and once again brought meat and other supplies. "This is too much," Amelia protested. "The work was not worth $5. "It is worth that to me," Austin said, "and I want you to have it." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. "I want to give you something else too," he said, "but I am afraid you will refuse it." "What is it?" Amelia asked, her curiosity overcoming her usual caution. Austin opened the pouch and carefully withdrew a small carved wooden box, no bigger than his palm. It was beautifully made, the wood polished smooth and carved with delicate patterns of leaves and vines. On top, a tiny metal mechanism was embedded in the wood. "I made this for you," Austin said, his voice gruff with embarrassment. "I am not much of a craftsman, but I wanted to make you something." He turned a small key on the side of the box, and suddenly music filled the air. It was a simple melody, sweet and haunting, played on what sounded like tiny bells. The tune was one Amelia's mother used to sing, an old folk song about a girl and her true love, and tears sprang to her eyes at the sound. "How did you do this?" she whispered, taking the box carefully in her hands. "I had the music mechanism sent from back east," Austin admitted. "It took months to arrive. I carved the box myself over the winter. I know it is not very fine, but I wanted you to have something pretty, something that was just yours." Amelia looked down at the music box, watching the tiny gears turn inside the mechanism visible through a small glass window on the side. The melody played softly, filling the cold air with warmth and beauty. She had never owned anything pretty before, nothing made just for her, nothing given with love. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Austin. Thank you so much." She looked up at him, and in his blue eyes she saw everything she had been too afraid to name. He cared for her, truly cared, and the realization was both terrifying and wonderful. "Amelia," he said, taking a step closer. "I know I am just a rough mountain man, and I do not have much to offer besides a cabin and a hard life. But I think about you all the time when I am up in the mountains. I think about your smile and your voice and the way you take such care with everything you do. I wonder if maybe, if you could see your way to it, you might consider coming up to see my cabin. Just to visit," he added quickly. "Just so you could see what life is like up there before you make any decisions." "Decisions?" Amelia whispered, though her heart was racing because she knew exactly what he meant. About whether you could ever see yourself living there, Austin said. With me, as my wife. The words hung in the air, and Amelia felt the world shift around her. He was asking her to marry him, this strong, kind man who barely knew her but had shown her more care than anyone in her life. He was offering her a home, a future, a chance at happiness. "I would like to see your cabin," she said, and watched his face transform with hope. "You would?" He asked as if he could not quite believe it. "I would," she confirmed. "I think I would like that very much." Austin broke into a wide smile, the first time she had seen him truly grin, and it changed his entire face, making him look younger and full of joy. "The passes should be clear in another few weeks," he said. "I will come back for you then if you are sure." "I am sure," Amelia said, clutching the music box to her chest. "I am very sure." That night, alone in her attic room, Amelia wound the music box and listened to its sweet melody while wrapped in her blue blanket. For the first time in her life, she had something pretty that belonged to her, something precious given in love. And for the first time since her mother died, she had hope for the future, real and bright and possible. The next few weeks passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Austin left for the mountains but promised to return as soon as the weather cleared enough for travel. Amelia continued her work at the boarding house, but her heart was no longer in Concordia. It had gone up into the mountains with a blue-eyed man who carved music boxes and promised her a home. Margaret noticed the change in Amelia, and her suspicion grew when she saw the music box. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "It was a gift," Amelia said simply. "From that mountain man," Margaret said with disgust. "I suppose you think he is going to marry you and take you away from here." "I do think that," Amelia said calmly, "because he asked me and I said yes." Margaret's face went red with anger. "You ungrateful girl! After all I have done for you, giving you a roof over your head and food to eat, and you repay me by running off with the first man who shows you attention." "You have given me a roof, that is true," Amelia said, her own anger finally rising. "But you have also worked me like a slave, taken the money I earned and treated me with nothing but contempt. Austin has shown me more kindness in a few months than you have shown in all the time I have been here. So yes, I am going with him and I am grateful for it." Margaret sputtered and fumed, but there was nothing she could do. Amelia was of age and could make her own decisions, and though Margaret tried to guilt and manipulate her into staying, Amelia held firm. Mr. Davies and the other boarders were more supportive. "You deserve happiness, my dear," Mr. Davies said, "and I think you will find it with Austin Norwood. He is a good man and he clearly cares deeply for you. What if I am making a mistake?" Amelia asked, voicing the fear that kept her awake at night. "What if I am foolish to trust him?" "Life is full of risks," Mr. Davies said wisely. "But sometimes the biggest risk is not taking a chance on happiness when it is offered. You have lived without hope for too long, Amelia. It is time to choose something different." April arrived with warming temperatures and the sound of snowmelt rushing down from the mountains. The streets of Concordia turned to mud, and the first green shoots began to appear in the places where the snow had melted. Amelia watched the high passes every day, waiting for the moment when Austin would return. He came on a clear morning in mid-April, riding down from the mountains with his pack horse and a second riding horse following behind. Amelia saw him from the boarding house window and felt her heart leap with joy and nervous excitement. This was it. This was the moment when her life would change forever. She met him on the porch, her few possessions already bundled in a small pack. She had nothing of value except the blue blanket, the rabbit fur mittens, and the precious music box, but those things represented everything that mattered. They were gifts of love, and they were proof that someone in this world valued her. "Are you ready?" Austin asked, and there was tenderness in his eyes that made Amelia want to cry. "I am ready," she said. He helped her mount the second horse, securing her bundle behind the saddle. Margaret watched from the doorway with a pinched expression, but she said nothing. Mr. Davies and several of the other boarders came out to wish Amelia well, and Mr. Davies pressed a small purse into her hand. "A wedding gift," he said, "from all of us. You have earned it 10 times over." Amelia thanked them with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by their kindness. Then Austin urged his horse forward and she followed, leaving Concordia behind without a single regret. They rode for hours, climbing steadily into the mountains. The air grew colder and cleaner, scented with pine and the sharp freshness of snowmelt. Eagles circled overhead, and Amelia caught glimpses of deer watching them from the forest shadows. Austin led the way with confident ease, clearly at home in this wild landscape. "How much farther?" Amelia asked when they stopped to rest the horses by a rushing creek. "A few more hours," Austin said. "The cabin is in a valley on the other side of this ridge. It is remote, but it is beautiful. I hope you will think so too." "I already think so," Amelia said, looking around at the magnificent mountains rising on all sides. "This is incredible, Austin." "So wild and free," he smiled, looking relieved. "I am glad you see it that way. Some people find it too isolated, too far from civilization." "I have had enough of civilization," Amelia said. "People talk about how refined and proper it is, but I have found more cruelty in town than I ever expected to find in the wilderness." Austin's expression grew serious. "There are dangers here, that is true. Bears and mountain lions, harsh weather, accidents that can happen when you are far from help. But I will keep you safe, Amelia. I promise you that." "I believe you," she said, and she meant it. They rode on, cresting the ridge as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks. On the other side, the land dropped into a protected valley with a meadow at its center, and a clear stream running through it. At the edge of the meadow stood a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it, a small barn sheltered livestock, and beyond that, the forest rose thick and green up the mountainside. "There it is," Austin said. "Home." Amelia looked at the cabin and felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. This place, remote and wild as it was, felt more like home than anywhere she had lived. "It is perfect," she breathed. Austin helped her dismount, and together they walked toward the cabin. He opened the door and stood back to let her enter first. The interior was simple but well made, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy wooden table and chairs, and a sleeping loft reached by a ladder. Shelves held supplies and tools, and furs covered the plank floor. It was clean and organized, the home of a man who took care of his belongings. "I know it is not much," Austin said, hovering nervously by the door, "but I built it with my own hands, and it is sound and warm." "It is wonderful," Amelia said honestly. "I love it." Relief flooded his face. "There is a town about a day's ride from here, a place called Silver Creek. We can go there to be married properly if you want, or we can have someone come here. Whatever you prefer." "I would like to be married soon," Amelia said, feeling brave, "and I do not need anything fancy. Just something legal and binding." "Tomorrow, then," Austin said. "We will ride to Silver Creek tomorrow and find a preacher, unless you want to wait." "I do not want to wait," Amelia said. "I have waited long enough for my life to begin." That night, Austin slept in the barn while Amelia took the cabin, a proper arrangement until they were married. She climbed into the loft and found a comfortable bed piled with furs and wool blankets. She wound her music box and listened to its sweet melody while looking out the small window at the stars blazing overhead. Everything was so different from the life she had known, but it was different in all the best ways. The next morning, they rose early and made the long ride to Silver Creek. It was a small mining town, rough around the edges but with a church and a circuit preacher who happened to be in residence. He agreed to marry them that very afternoon, with 2 miners serving as witnesses. Amelia wore her patched dress, the only one she owned, but Austin looked at her as if she was wearing silk and diamonds. They spoke their vows in the small church with its rough-hewn pews and simple cross, and when Austin slipped a gold ring onto her finger, Amelia felt tears stream down her face. "I promise to take care of you," Austin said, his voice thick with emotion. "To keep you safe and warm and to spend my life trying to make you happy." "I promise to be your partner," Amelia replied, "to work beside you and build a life with you and to love you with everything I have." The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Austin kissed her gently, his big hands cradling her face with surprising tenderness. Amelia felt the last pieces of her broken heart mend in that moment, sealed together by hope and love, and the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. They stayed that night at the small boarding house in Silver Creek, properly married now, and Austin was gentle and patient with her, understanding that everything was new and a little frightening. "We have all the time in the world," he murmured, holding her close. "There is no rush, Amelia. I just want you to feel safe and loved." And she did. For the first time in years, she felt completely safe, wrapped in her husband's strong arms while the mountain wind sang outside their window. They returned to the cabin the next day, and Amelia began to make it truly home. She cleaned and organized, hung curtains made from fabric Austin bought in Silver Creek, and planted a garden in the meadow. Austin taught her to fish in the stream and to identify the edible plants that grew wild in the mountains. He showed her how to shoot his rifle and how to read the signs of changing weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. The days developed a rhythm that Amelia found deeply satisfying. Austin would check his trap lines while she tended the garden and kept the cabin. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the peaks, talking about everything and nothing. At night, they would lie together in the loft while Amelia played her music box, the sweet melody filling their home with beauty. "I still cannot believe you made this for me," Amelia said one night, running her fingers over the carved wood. "I wanted you to have something beautiful," Austin said. "You had never owned anything pretty before, and that seemed wrong to me. You deserve beautiful things, Amelia." "I have you," she said softly. "That is beautiful enough." Summer came to the mountains in a riot of wildflowers and warm sunshine. Amelia's garden flourished, and she learned to preserve food for the coming winter. Austin taught her to tan hides and to make soap from animal fat and lye. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her endless toil at the boarding house had never been. Here, she was working for herself and her husband, building their life together. They made trips to Silver Creek every few weeks for supplies and news from the outside world. The country was changing, with the railroad pushing west and new settlers arriving all the time. But in their mountain valley, life remained simple and timeless, governed by the seasons and the needs of survival. In late summer, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Austin one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Austin's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, and finally pure joy. "A baby," he repeated. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Amelia asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy." Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Amelia, I am so happy I can barely put it into words. You have given me so much already, and now this. A child, our child." Amelia felt tears of relief and joy slide down her cheeks. "I was afraid you might not be ready." "I have been ready for a family my whole life," Austin said. "I just never found the right person to build it with until you." The winter that followed was the hardest of Amelia's life, but also the happiest. The snow fell deep and heavy, trapping them in the valley for weeks at a time. Amelia's belly grew round with their child, and Austin fussed over her constantly, making sure she had enough to eat and stayed warm. He carved a cradle from pine wood, working on it every evening by the fire, and Amelia sewed tiny garments from soft cotton and wool. "What should we name the baby?" Amelia asked one night as they lay in their warm bed. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my father," Austin said. "His name was James, and if it is a girl, you should choose Sarah," Amelia said immediately, "after my mother." "James or Sarah Norwood," Austin said, testing the names. "I like both of them." The baby came in early March, born during a late winter storm that piled snow against the cabin walls. Austin delivered his son with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, and when he placed the squalling infant in Amelia's arms, she understood for the first time the true meaning of love. "James," she whispered, looking down at her son's red face and tiny fists. "James Austin Norwood." "He is perfect," Austin said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Amelia said. "I never thought I would have this. A husband who loves me, a home, a baby. I never dared to dream of it." "Dream bigger from now on," Austin said, kissing her forehead. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making your dreams come true." They brought James through that first difficult winter and into the spring. Amelia marveled at how quickly he grew, how he changed from a tiny bundle into a baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Austin was a devoted father, taking James on walks around the valley and singing to him in his deep voice. As the years passed, their family grew. Sarah came 2 years after James, born during a thunderstorm with her mother's determination and her father's strength. Then came Thomas, then little Margaret, named for the cousin Amelia had left behind, though this Margaret would be raised with love instead of resentment. The cabin grew too, with Austin adding rooms to accommodate their expanding family. The valley became their world, a place of safety and love where their children could grow strong and free. Austin taught the boys to hunt and trap, while Amelia taught the girls to garden and sew. But all the children learned everything, because both parents believed that survival in the mountains required everyone to know every skill. Sometimes, Amelia thought about her old life in Concordia, about the girl she had been who owned nothing pretty and believed she had no future. It seemed like a different lifetime, a different person entirely. She had become someone new in these mountains, someone strong and capable and deeply loved. "You ever regret it?" Austin asked one evening when they were alone on the porch, watching the sunset while their children played in the meadow. "Leaving town and coming up here?" "Never," Amelia said firmly. "This is where I was meant to be, with you." "I think about that day I first saw you at the boarding house," Austin said. "You looked so cold and tired, but there was something in your eyes, a strength that caught my attention. I knew right then I wanted to know you better." "I thought you were just being kind," Amelia admitted. "I could not imagine why you would care about someone like me." "Someone like you," Austin repeated. "Amelia, you are the strongest person I know. You survived so much and never became bitter or cruel. You kept your kindness and your hope even when you had every reason to give up. That is not weakness, that is incredible strength." Amelia leaned against her husband's solid shoulder, feeling the peace that had become her constant companion in this mountain life. "Do you remember the music box?" she asked. "Of course I remember," Austin said. "You still play it almost every night." "It was the first pretty thing I ever owned," Amelia said softly. "But it represented so much more than that. It represented someone caring about me, someone thinking about what would make me happy. It represented hope and the possibility of love." "That music box changed my life, Austin." "You changed mine," Austin replied. "I was content up here alone, or so I thought, but you showed me what I was missing. You brought color and warmth and love into my life. You gave me a family and a future worth building." They sat together as the sun sank behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside the cabin, the music box played its sweet melody, and their children's laughter rang through the valley. Amelia thought about all the years stretching ahead, full of hard work and simple joys, challenges and triumphs, and the steady presence of love that bound them all together. She had started with nothing, a girl who owned not a single pretty thing, who had no family and no hope. But she had built something beautiful from that emptiness, something real and lasting. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a mountain man who carved her a music box and promised her the world, and he had kept that promise. Every single day, in 1,000 small ways, Austin showed her that she was valued and cherished and loved. Their children grew up knowing they were wanted, that they were precious beyond measure. The cabin in the valley became a home filled with laughter and music, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from living a life built on love. As the stars began to emerge overhead, Austin pulled Amelia to her feet. "Dance with me," he said, humming the tune from the music box. Amelia laughed and let him lead her in a slow waltz on the porch, their bodies moving together with the ease of long partnership. Their children stopped playing to watch, smiling at their parents' obvious affection. "I love you, Amelia Norwood," Austin said, his blue eyes reflecting the emerging stars. "I love you too, Austin Norwood," Amelia replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for giving me a life I never dreamed possible. Thank you for the music box and everything it represented. Thank you for saying yes," Austin said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man with nothing to offer but a cabin and his heart." "That was everything I needed," Amelia said. "It was more than enough. It was perfect." They held each other as the night deepened around them, surrounded by the mountains and the forest and the life they had built together. The music box played on inside the cabin, its sweet melody a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. It had been carved with love by hands that knew hard work, given to a woman who had never owned anything pretty, and it had opened the door to a future neither of them had imagined. Sometimes, Amelia thought, the most beautiful things in life come from the simplest gestures. A warm blanket given in winter, a pair of mittens made with care, a music box carved in the lonely hours of a mountain winter by a man who barely knew her but wanted her to have something lovely. These small kindnesses had shown her that she was worth something, that she deserved beauty and love and happiness. And she had found all of those things, here in this wild valley with the man who had first seen her value when she could not see it herself. They had built a life together, one day at a time, one small act of love building on another until they had created something extraordinary. The seasons continued their endless cycle, bringing snow and sun, hardship and plenty, but through it all, Amelia and Austin remained steady. They weathered storms together, celebrated victories together, and raised their children with the same love and care that had first brought them together. The music box was eventually passed down to their daughter Sarah, who treasured it as much as her mother had, understanding that it represented not just a pretty object but the love story that had begun with its creation. Years later, when Austin and Amelia were old and gray, sitting on the same porch watching their grandchildren play in the meadow, Amelia would still wind the music box every evening. The tune never grew old, never lost its sweetness, because it was bound up with memories of transformation and hope and the beginning of everything that mattered. "You remember the first time I gave you that?" Austin asked, his voice rough with age but his eyes still the same brilliant blue. "I remember everything," Amelia said. "I remember thinking it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I remember realizing that someone cared enough about me to make me something special. I remember understanding for the first time that I might have a future worth living." "You gave me a future too," Austin said. "You gave me everything." They sat together as they had for decades, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had called home for so long. Their children had grown and some had left the valley to build lives of their own. But several had stayed, building cabins nearby and raising the next generation in the shadow of the peaks. The valley had become home to the Norwood family, a place where love was the foundation and hard work was the building material. Amelia thought about the girl she had been, standing in the cold street of Concordia with nothing to her name and no hope for the future. That girl had been so lost, so alone, believing herself to be worthless because that was what the world had told her. But she had been wrong. She had never been worthless. She had simply been waiting for someone to see her value and for the courage to see it herself. The music box had been the catalyst, the symbol of change and possibility. But the real transformation had come from within, from Amelia choosing to take a chance on love, from her willingness to leave behind everything familiar for the promise of something better. It had taken courage to ride into the mountains with a man she barely knew, to trust that his kindness was genuine and that his love was real. But it had been the best decision of her life, and she had never regretted it for a single moment. Life in the mountains was hard, but it was honest. The work was endless, but it was meaningful. The isolation was real, but it was filled with love and family and the deep satisfaction of living a life aligned with their values. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked, taking her hand in his. "About how far we have come," Amelia said. "About the girl I was and the woman I became. About this life we built together from nothing but hope and determination and love." "It has been a good life," Austin said. "It has been a beautiful life," Amelia corrected. "The most beautiful life I could have imagined." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched over them through all the years of their marriage. The music box played its sweet melody, and the sound of their grandchildren's laughter drifted up from the meadow. Everything that mattered was here in this valley, in this moment, in the love that had sustained them through decades of life together. Amelia had started with nothing, but she had ended with everything. She had learned that beauty was not about possessions or wealth or status. Beauty was about love freely given and gratefully received. Beauty was about building something meaningful with your hands and your heart. Beauty was about finding someone who saw your worth when you could not see it yourself, and choosing to build a life together based on mutual respect and deep affection. The music box that Austin had carved for her so many years ago still played perfectly, its mechanism as true as the day he had given it to her. But it was more than just a box that played music. It was a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope was possible. It was proof that one person's kindness could change another person's entire life. It was a testament to the power of love to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, Austin helped Amelia to her feet and they went inside to the warm cabin. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the familiar smell of home surrounded them. They climbed the ladder to their loft, moving more slowly than they once had, but still together, still connected by the bond that had formed so many years ago. Amelia placed the music box on the shelf beside their bed, where it had lived for decades. She did not wind it again that night. The melody was already playing in her heart, as it had been since the day Austin first placed the box in her hands and showed her that she deserved beautiful things. She had never owned anything pretty before that music box, but she had learned that the prettiest things in life were not objects at all. They were moments of connection, acts of kindness, and the steady presence of love through all the seasons of life. She had learned that she was valuable not because of what she owned, but because of who she was. She had learned that home was not a place but a person, and that person was lying beside her now, his breathing deep, and even as he drifted toward sleep. "Austin," she whispered. "Yes, love." He murmured, "Thank you for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for saying yes," he replied. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me back." They fell asleep as they had for decades, wrapped in each other's arms while the mountain wind sang outside and the stars wheeled overhead. The music box sat silent on its shelf, but its presence filled the room with memory and meaning. It was a small thing, that wooden box with its simple mechanism, but it had changed everything. It had shown a lonely girl that she was worth something. It had opened the door to love and family and a life full of purpose. It had been the first pretty thing Amelia had ever owned, and it had taught her that beauty was not about perfection or wealth, but about love made tangible, about someone caring enough to spend hours carving and planning and creating something special just for her. The music box still sits on that shelf today, passed down through the generations of Norwoods who make their home in that Montana valley. Each generation hears the story of how it brought together a mountain man and a girl with nothing, how it became the symbol of their love and the foundation of their family. The mechanism still works perfectly, the tune still plays sweetly, and the carved wood is polished smooth by the hands of all those who have treasured it over the years. It is just a music box, small and simple, carved by rough hands in the isolation of a mountain winter. But it represents something much larger than itself. It represents the power of kindness to transform lives. It represents the courage it takes to trust and to love. It represents the beauty that can be built from nothing when two people commit to building it together. And every time the key turns and the melody plays, everyone who hears it remembers that the prettiest things in life are not bought or traded, but given freely from one heart to another. Tokens of love that last far longer than the objects themselves. The music box that Austin carved for Amelia still plays softly, a reminder of where they started and all that they built together, a testament to a love that began in the Wild West and lasted a lifetime.